Hello friends, welcome. Friends, everybody who might be watching TV or might looking at social media news must have seen this picture where US President Trump is holding a billboard and it has all the tariff numbers listed down for various countries, and he is quite thrilled, and he calls it as a liberation day. Now when this tariff rate came out, people were wondering what was the rationale behind this calculation, because he has termed this as reciprocal tariff, right? Everybody knows that. So people were trying to visualize, and the people came out with their own understanding, etc. And then there were some investigative journalists in Financial Times, etc. They were already aware what the logic was. And then finally what we saw, that the US department, the USTR, USTR.gov came out with this explanation, reciprocal tariff calculation. And if you read this, you will find that this is a very small document, maybe not even a page, where it talks about an executive summary, then an introduction, then the basic approach, and it gives out a formula which looks quite overwhelming. Now, anybody who doesn't have a very good, who fears maths, he will, when he looks at this formula, will either think that there is a huge amount of scientific basis to those calculations on which this billboard has been formed, because there is no way to believe otherwise, because this formula looks quite scientific, right? Now friends, why I am doing this video today? I am doing this video to unlock this mystery of this formula, right? Just before you. And you don't have to be a mathematical student or an economic student to understand this formula. That's all we am trying to do. And I'm going to basically prove at the end of this presentation that how faulty this formula is and how misplaced it is to be implemented in a circumstances like this. And the purpose of this formula is completely different. That's all we are going to talk about in this video. So friends, in order to make this video more structured, I have created this slide deck. Now in this slide deck, the title is Demystifying the Reciprocal Tariff Formula and understanding what it does and what it can't do, right? So everything it is being used for. So let's go to the next slide. What is the purpose of reciprocal tariff formula? So let's look at the purpose. To estimate how much US import would fall if the tariff on a specific country was increased. Now, try to understand this. This is to estimate what? How much US import would fall if tariff on a specific country was increased. So, it is to explain the impact of tariff increase, not to raise tariff, right? Not to do the other way around, okay? It is to estimate how much US import would fall if the tariff on a specific country is increased. That's the whole purpose. So the original use case for this reciprocal tariff formula is to measure the impact of tariff on imports on one country or a selective country, not to the whole world. And I'll tell you why it is not applied to the whole world and how the assumption will fall apart, right? As if you apply this formula to the whole world, first to do tariff prediction, right? It is completely different from what the purpose of this formula is, which is to measure how much US import would fall if the tariff on a specific country is increased. Now, the key assumption is of this formula, in the originally when the formula was established, is supply chain remain intact. It's important, or it is not, very, very severely disrupted. If the supply chain remains largely intact, the formula can be applied. Alternate source of or domestic production exists. It is important. Means there has to be an alternate source of those imports which will get diminished when you are going to raise tariff, right? And importers will be able to absorb some of the cost. Means all the costs are not going to fall into the head of the consumer. So these are the key assumptions, right? Now let's go to the next slide. Who designed the formula for what purpose? Now, formula is rooted in classical trade economics and was not created by a single individual. It is important. So, it combines the principle of Alfred Marshall's elasticity theory and partial equilibrium model developed in the mid-20th century. It became widely used as a trade impact analysis during the trade liberalization study by World Bank, WTO, and academic economists. The goal is to estimate, as I told you, how much that a change in tariff affects the import volume, not to engineer balance of trade or set optimal tariff. It's important. It is not to engineer balance of trade or set optimal tariff. So the modern misuse, what is going on, it is now being reversed and repurposed to justify tariff hike, aiming to eliminate trade deficit, which is the fundamental distortion in its intent. Okay, friends, let's go to the next slide. Let's talk about the formula. Now you will understand in this slide that how this formula works and what kind of problems that we are encountering if you are going to use this formula in the manner which the US has used. Now let's look at the formula. The formula actually looks something like this. So this is the delta change in import. Means it is change in the net import. It includes export, import. So change in net import. That is important, which is being called as trade deficit in the US formula, right? So this is the delta change in import. Delta change in tariff means how much you change the tariff. This is the elasticity. What is elasticity? Elasticity is the change in percentage quantity of demand divided by change in price. For example, if suppose you increase tariff by 10%, okay, let's go here, increase tariff by 10%, and what happens is that if there is a price increase, right, of 1%, let's assume that there is a price increase of 1%, and the demand drops by, let's say, 4%. You increase the price because if you are going to basically, increase, change the tariff by 10%, the price goes up by 1%, but the demand drops by 4%. So this is called elasticity. You understand? So price increase in percentage term, so demand decrease in percentage term divided by price increase. So this is elasticity. Now what is pass-through? Pass-through is again a term that has been used, which is shy. How much tariff actually gets added to the final price? Means, let's say if suppose there is a 100%, so let's assume that there is some tariff increase, which is X. How much of that X increase gets added to the end product price? Means how much of it gets absorbed by the importer. So this, if it is 100%, then it is 1. If it is 25%, then it is 0.25. And the current imports, which is the total imports that US is making in that, from that particular country. So as I explained to you, the terms explain tariff, how much the delta tariff means, how much the tariff is increased, elasticity E, which I will already talk about, how sensitive are the buyers to tariff hike, which is the change in percentage demand divided by the percentage increase in price, right? Pass through, how much tariff gets added to the final price, and current imports, the total goods we currently import from that country. For example, if the tariff increase by 10%, elasticity is 4%, means 4% decrease in demand, 1% increase in price. Pass through is 0.25%, means rest of them has been absorbed. Rest of the price increase has been absorbed by the importer. Then if there is an imports are at 100 billion, then if you apply this formula, the import will drop by $10 billion, right? So this is in net how the formula is typically used, right? Now, why the formula was not designed for, what is the formula not designed for? Misuse, being used to set tariff to eliminate trade deficit, being applied to globally instead of country by country, right? Because when you are having a large ecosystem, and in the large ecosystem, you are trying to talk about a specific country where the trade between those two countries are limited by certain volumes, because when you are applying the change in tariff formula, means how much is going to be the change in import, you have to ensure that the overall global economic dynamics is not largely disturbed. Because if there is a huge amount of disturbance into the overall global economics, then this formula is not applicable. Why there is a problem? Formula assumes linear and isolated behavior, which I was talking about. It assumes linear and isolated behavior, not a non-linear behavior, okay? The real world trade economy is interconnected and dynamic, and that is the reason there is a problem, okay? Now, what key flaws when used through said global tariffs? Let's talk about that. First, not a tool to find right tariff, just to show import drop under certain assumption. It assumes no supply chain distortion, no major supply chain distortion. There could be some, but no major. Assumes import can be replaced locally, right? Assumes importer will absorb some tariff cost, pass through, let's say 0.25. Ignores long-term investment behavior and global trust. So it's like a small tool of diagnosis. It is not a policy tool. It is a diagnosis tool to diagnose a particular problem and see what kind of intervention might be required, what kind of leverage a particular country has against another country. That's the whole purpose of this formula, not to set tariffs, okay? Why these assumptions do not hold? Supply chain fragility. Disruption creates shortage, not balance. You understand? It creates shortage. So if suppose because of this formula being applied, the tariff is implied, as you are assuming that you are going to completely demolish this balance of trade imbalance between US and other countries, and then you are setting the tariff rates to a level, then all the other assumptions, supply chain, fragility, etc. breaks apart, because from where you are going to get replacement of the supply chain, because US does not still have the supply chain today, and those supply chain can be created in US abruptly, right, in a short window of time. So this is the point. Domestic capacity lacking. So US can't instantly stop producing, produce what it stop importing. Global tariff is not temporary pain. Importers won't absorb permanent loss, because at the time when this formula was used, when it was the study which was quoted, if you look at here, there are some references which are quoted here, where these references, mainly one of the thing was China. And when the China reference was quoted at that time, there was some temporary absorption on the point of view of cost absorption, because the importers felt it was a temporary activity, is not a permanent. So they were absorbing the losses. So 0.25 is on the basis that it is temporary, it is not permanent. The tariff gets passed on inflation. That is why the inflation is as a result. The inflation dynamo. You increase tariffs, supply drops, price increase, consumer pay more. Now, somebody may tell that, look, let's say if I apply tariff, the imports to US continues at the same rate which is continuing right now, or maybe at a subdued rate. Okay. That is the assumption which the US government is making, that the imports may fall slightly. So we are trying to balance the trade between those countries. Now the point here is that even if there is no retaliation, let's say the import falls and you are trying to offset your losses, from the point of view of what? That the taxes that you are supposed to reduce, because US is not going to have this as a only policy intervention. So they are talking to their citizens that they are going to reduce taxes. Now, the reduction in taxes and the gain from these taxes on tariffs, you cannot visualize. Means these may not be clearly visible right now, that how much is going to be the income from this tariff. Because these numbers that you have right now today, which is based on the current supply chain, those are not going to remain static. There may be a huge fall of supply chain. The consumers in US may stop spending, because nobody would like to spend higher amount of money on goods just because the imports are going to become costly on account of the rates which are going to be applicable. So on the basis of that, you are making an assumption that you are going to make some collection. So the collection will be what? The import stays at the same level or drops. So you apply a certain percentage on the import. So that is the collection you are making. You are making an assumption that the consumer in US is going to buy those goods at increased rates. And then you are making an assumption that you are going to subsidize those consumers by reducing the tax rates. So it is too much of an assumption in an economic system which is so fragile, and it is based primarily on trust, not on individual transient actions, friends. So therefore, if US tries to offset this pain by cutting tax, government revenue drops. There is a chance that the government revenue will drop, fiscal deficit will rise, borrowing will increase, and the expected inflation is going to become very, very bad, because the US consumers will have no trust in the government. They will think that the inflation is going to hit, the bond yields are going to explode, the equity prices are going to go down, right? People will not make any investments going forward anywhere, right? Now, let's understand this. That the whole premise is here that the US companies are going to start pulling their factories back in US. Now, if you have a policy structure which is so dynamic and the investors do not have any visibility how these tariffs are finally going to settle down, why would anybody at this point of time will make any investment anywhere in the world? Forget about US. It will be a completely investment halt. There will be just uncertainty. Drastic tariff policy creates instability. No business wants investment and unpredictability to invest in an unpredictable environment. Rebuilding domestic industry will take years, if not months, right? Now, the bigger risk now. What is the bigger risk? US will lose credibility in global economic leadership. Strained alliance with and trade wars. And then economic tension, which may spiral into a global instability. Now, there are a lot of countries which are not in good terms with US. The world is made up of countries which are looking at their own interest, but they are not fighting with each other. We are not in a state of conflict, except these conflicts are going on in small parts of the world. Now, this whole system of distrust, people don't trust each other politically. They are glued to each other using this economic fabric. The economic fabric, trade, is a glue which ties people together. People who do not see eye to each other are tied with this economic bond. Now, if you are going to break this economic bond, then what is going to happen? Those countries which were tied to each other using this economic bond are no longer will have the motivation to act responsibly. There can be huge amount of global instability. Wars may take place. It will remain in an armed conflict. So therefore, this is going to be very risky. So final takeaway, right? This is the final slide. The reciprocal tariff formula is a diagnostic tool. It is not a policy engine. Using it as a basis for global economic restructuring is like using a thermometer to control weather. It is a measurement tool. It is not a policy intervention tool, right? So, if you are going to use a thermometer, which is a measuring tool to measure how the temperature is, it is not a tool to control weather. So, you can't use a formula to control the behavior of world trade. That is not going to happen. And then, this is transitory in nature. You have a global economic system which is stable. And if you are going to inject a transient into the global economy by creating this policy uncertainties, these huge tariffs, which are more than 50%, then undoing these things are going to be very, very costly. Because you will going to lose leverage. Because as long as you don't use the stick, you have leverage. As soon as you use the stick, you lose leverage at that moment of time. And that is what the mistake US has done. It should not have done this, right? As long as it has the threat that they will be able to use it, but when you use it, people retaliate because they have been cornered. There are big countries which will retaliate. And when they retaliate, US no longer has any further measures to contain it other than military power. Then what will happen is that you can't raise the tariff and make it 2 times because 50% and 100% is one and the same. It does not matter, right? You can't make it 200%. Got it, friends? So this is a very bad thing for the world economy. I do not know what is going on, friends. But I will be very, very, eager to hear from you what you think about this. And let me know in the comment section what are your thoughts. And I will be very happy to learn it, viewers. And thanks for listening as usual. And I'll come back with a new video and a new topic next time. Thank you very much for listening till the end. Thanks a lot.